I'm your coach, Matthias Lidborn, and the topic of today is how to learn from your ego-bound triggers. So in this video, I will talk to you about how you can use your triggers as a clue to where you should work on yourself. So, for example, if you have to work on your ego, as most of us do, is not something that you want to get rid of completely, because it's also useful to have, especially in the first part of your life. It makes you go forward in life, and that is very needed in the first part of your life. But the ego can also get you in trouble, and the ego will make you feel feelings that is unproportionate to a certain situation. So the ego directs us to engage in primitive urges like laziness and fast reward and decadent behavior. The ego is that part that makes us act like, the part of you that say, I do this because this satisfies me and give me pleasures. And it makes you think that you need to have all these external things and you need to be better than the other person. And in a conversation, you might not think so much of what the other person says, but you think about how you can say the next best thing to make yourself come out as or be perceived as a very intelligent or a smart person, or edgy in some way. So you can absolutely think that this is something that can bring us very miserable lives if we are attached to our ego and only make the ego drive the car, so to say. And I think we should put the ego in the back seat now and then and reflect on why you act in a certain way. So I will give you a little example of how you can work with your ego. A little brief overview of how your process can look like. And you can use this, you can call it protocol, to make yourself more congruent with your ego. So here's an overview of how it might look like. First of all, you have to be curious, because often the ego builds up this resistance that make us have excuses to why we act in a certain way. So if you find that you have a big resistance in some situation or in some area of life or in some manner, be curious, be suspicious, because it might happen that where you have the greatest resistance is where you should attend. And often that actually is the case. Where you least want to look is where you find the most shining treasures. Because think of it, it's a treasure if you get conscious of what you should do. Then I think it's very important to intellectually understand the ego. What is the ego? And there is very much written about the ego. But the ego can differ in different philosophers or psychologists' point of view. For me, the Jungian ego is the one that resonates with me and is what I have experienced myself. Okay, so be curious, acquire some knowledge, but the most important one is to make yourself aware of what your ego is. And when you get aware and conscious of what your ego is and how it works and operates in your behaviors and so forth, you will then be able to do the change. And the change is, of course, the most important one. But if you don't make yourself aware of your own ego, you can't make the change. Because when you know what the ego is, it's much easier for you to acknowledge part of your behaviors and feelings that is not congruent with you, not congruent with your own soul. But before you make the change, you of course have to integrate the useful parts of the ego and those parts of the ego that is congruent with yourself, and as I said, with yourself and your soul. And of course, one can also dissolve one's ego with intuition and foresight, of course. But often that is not so easy because the ego is very tricky. It got this trickster archetypal sense to it. It makes you legitimize certain behaviors and thoughts and tell you those weird stories that you're worth this and that person are not going to show me what's right, and yeah, so forth. So it breaks down to be very suspicious and be conscious of how your ego operates. Get some knowledge of what the ego is, and also integrate. And the integration can look like a form of accountability technique. You write, you're journaling, and you can go back in your journal and see where the ego appears. Also, every time you have a trigger, be suspicious of that trigger, because it's always something behind it. And if you get triggered, you always have more work to do with yourself. And of course, the trigger is not always coming from the ego, but in many cases, nowadays especially, it's the most common reason why you get a trigger. So next time you get a trigger, be very curiously and suspicious of it. You will be surprised of what comes up if you really do the work. Take your book, journal of what your day is like, and then, as I said, go back in the book and see what you read. Write down the situations where you find yourself triggered, and do it honestly and reflect on it. As I always say, reflect on it is very important. Meditate on it. If you have a meditation routine, use that. When you can recognize where your triggers come from, you will then be able to make the change. And the deeper you go, the greater the change. I hope you found any value in this video, and if you did, you're always welcome to make a donation to me through DonorBox, PayPal, and also Patreon. If it happens to be that you have a struggle in your life or just a question to me, you can put it in the comment section or send me an email. And the email you will find in the description below. If you would like to book a coaching session with me, you can always visit my website, and my website is also in the description. You can also, of course, send me an email if you want to book a coaching session. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and also please share my content. And if you don't follow me on Instagram, I recommend that you do that if you want some more content from me. And the Instagram account has the same name as this YouTube channel, which is my name, Matthias Lidborn. I thank you very much for today, and hope I see you next time. Bye.